The winds ramp up and the lights go out. SDGE cuts power to thousands as San Diego and California try to prevent wildfires. California is paying more for gas than anywhere else by a lot. Now the state is looking into whether major brands are fixing prices. And is it a case of election shopping? San Diego City Council defends its push to move up the convention center vote. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Rob Creer, who writes about weather and climate for the San Diego Union Tribune, KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Chatlani, Rob Nicoleski, energy reporter for the Union Tribune, and Lori Weisberg, who covers tourism and marketing for the Union Tribune. Well, we turn first to Raymond Chandler, the opening of his 1938 short story, Red Wind. There was a desert wind blowing that night. It was one of those hot, dry Santa Anas that come down through the mountain passes and curl your hair and make your nerves jump and your skin itch. On nights like that, every booze party ends in a fight. Meek little housewives feel the edge of the carving knife and study their husbands' necks. Anything can happen. And wildfires can happen. Santa Ana winds have caused unthinkable destruction in California since 1938. They're driving fires north and south today. With the Sade fire now near Ramona, scores of structures destroyed in Geyserville and Sonoma County, many thousands evacuated, in several other California communities, plus hundreds of thousands who've had power disruptions. Well, that's a lot going on here. And Robert, remind us specifically what these winds are and how they occur.
You're going to make me break out the Meteorology 101 book.
There you go.
This is the time of year where we get the high pressure that occurs over the Great Basin. And so the basic rule of meteorology is the air is going to move from high pressure to low pressure. And when we've got a Santa Ana, we've got relatively low pressure over Southern California or nearby. So now you've got air on the move from the Great Basin towards Southern California. And that air starts off, it's not all that hot over the Great Basin, but as it comes towards us, it hits the mountains, and as it goes down the slope, it warms up, it gets compressed, and for every 1,000 feet of elevation that it sinks, it gains 5 degrees in temperature.
Why we get so hot here this
exactly.
week.
And what the meteorologists used to call a true Santa Ana is when it gets to the coast, that's when it's actually the hottest. So like yesterday, San Diego was 94, and Borrego Springs was only 90. So in addition to that, when that wind gets funneled through canyons, it gets accelerated and the winds are even blowing even faster, and that's when you hear the forecasters talk about below the canyons where the winds are strongest, and that's what it is. And when the winds are coming out of the east like they were tonight or last night, that's when San Diego gets hit the hardest.
And of course, red flag warning today through later today. We've had a fire, as I mentioned, in the open, up and down the state. We've had some fires, a lot of evacuations, but this event isn't nearly as bad, or at least as prolonged, as the ones we had in 03 and 07 when we had those terrible destructive fires in San Diego County.
That's right. I'll start you with an anecdote here. So last night I got home, the branches were moving, empty trash cans blown over, some leaves in the pool and everything, but it wasn't anything horrible. In 2007, those winds were howling, and it sounded like a wounded animal, unlike anything I've heard or before or since. But that's just an anecdote. Now, the Forest Service and the fire people have come up with a way to rate these Santa Anas. The Santa Ana Wildfire Index, Threat Index. And this one, believe it or not, is only rated as moderate. And it is capable of spreading fires rapidly, and they would be hard to stop. But if we ever got up to the extreme category, that's when the winds are explosive and the fires are spreading explosively, and the fires are next to impossible to stop.
And of course, we've seen that here recently, just the last few years, and talked about that on the show throughout California.
So that's what was going on in 2007, but this time not, which is not to say this isn't a dangerous situation, and that fires, if they do get started, they're going to spread rapidly. It's just not as bad as it was then.
In a week, 2-3 weeks from now, right on through until the rains start, we could have this really through the winter, right?
Right. In fact, we've got another Santa Ana, probably not going to be as hot, coming Sunday, Monday, and then perhaps another one coming Halloween.
Okay. Well, Shalina, KPBS this week we covered what utilities like SDGE learned from the big fires in years past and these planned power outages. We've heard a lot about that in the last couple of weeks in the news here. Well, why are they done, and who's been affected this week in San Diego County?
Yeah, the reason why they're done is pretty simple. There's lots of electricity flowing through power lines, and in the fires, as you mentioned, the devastating fires that we had in the past, they have been connected to SDG&E's power lines next to the brush, causing sparks, causing the fires. So since 2013, SDG&E has had this, power safety shutoff plan to prevent these fires from occurring. And this week, it's been impacting folks in East County areas and spreading all the way closer to San Diego, San Diego proper, in places like Poway and Ramona.
And we're going to get some local reaction here in a minute, but this has been really upsetting for people in Northern California, where, of course, PG&E is shutting off this power for the same reason up there, but it was many more homes involved. I mean, over 1 million people, maybe 2 million people, as we've worked through these Santa Anas in the last 10 days.
Yeah, it was
a lot of complaints up there.
Lots of complaints. It was over 1 million people, and the reason for that, I would, conjecture, is that this is relatively new for PG&E. Their they say their first major power safety shutoff happened in June this year. SDG&E has been doing this since 2013. It's kind of put in place a plan to notify people. It has operations in place, and PG&E kind of did it at the last minute. Didn't really notify a lot.
They didn't do it very well, right?
Yeah, and didn't notify a lot of people. But I will say, and maybe Rob, you could speak to this. PG&E is a lot bigger than SDG&E.
Yeah, they've got a much larger service territory, and also the geography is different in Northern California. In Southern California, we don't have as many trees.
A lot more forests up there.
Yeah, a lot more forests, and a lot of those forests have not been cleared of fuel, so to speak. And so, yeah, it's a bigger job for PG&E, and also PG&E has, just as you said, PG&E hasn't been as advanced as SDG&E has, because after those 2007 wildfires that Rob mentioned, San Diego Gas and Electric has spent $1.5 billion in improvements and other measures to try to reduce and prevent wildfires.
Still, we've had our complaints here. That's up our soundbite here. I want to hear from somebody we interviewed out the Live Oak Market and Liquor Store near Boulevard here. This would be a shop owner, Sam Matthew. Let's hear him.
I don't know why he's here. I have no idea. We keep calling, and everybody says something else. There's some more safety for windy, and there's mile from here, less than mile. They have power and the same wind in same area. I don't know why is only this area. I have no idea.
All right. So in this, it's confusing to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm not right next to a forest and a dry area, but it has to do with the grid and where this goes, and it gets complicated. Right?
Yeah, it does. And also, you might be in an area where there doesn't seem to be any kind of wind, but you might be in an area where the lines might extend to an area that is windy and does have the chance for fire ignition.
Right. Lori?
Well, it just seems, and I know you and I were talking about this yesterday, that there is a lot of comparison between SDG&E and PG&E, but it seems like they're sort of damned if they do and damned if they don't. I mean, if they were to be less aggressive in doing these power shutoffs and a fire happens and they didn't do it, they'll be criticized for that. It seems like it's almost a no-win situation for them in this sort of court of public opinion.
Yeah, and PG&E was criticized exactly for that, because I believe it was the Camp Fire or the Butte Fire last year.
80 people killed, yeah.
And PG&E had a chance, had the opportunity to shut off the power, and they decided not to, and they got criticized heavily for that.
And Robert, I wanted to get to, before we leave this segment, we mentioned, of course, the power shutoffs, and then it's a big deal. But since the 03 and the 07 fires, there's been a lot of other improvements down here. SDG&E, with the help of a lot of academic folks, have done weather stations in the backcountry. Explain some of the things they've done. Better communications.
The SDG&E probably has the most elaborate, sophisticated backcountry weather monitoring network probably in the world. And they've got all kinds of weather stations out there. They've got cameras, and they can be incredibly proactive. And they know what's happening, and they can relay out to other people that are going to be affected by it. So that's a huge difference because they can know beforehand what's about to happen.
All right. Well, we're out of time on this segment, but we'll keep our fingers crossed here as we go forward and pray for the rains coming here, maybe after Halloween. Who knows? Well, we're going to move on. California has always been a trendsetter. We've long been a national leader in new entertainment, the internet revolution, fine wine, to name a few. California also has the dubious distinction of high gas prices, much higher than what's seen at pumps across the lower 48. So, Rob, start with why we're paying more. It's fees and it's
taxes and fees and all those things.
It's real complicated, isn't it? Let's dive into this.
When you take a look at it, right off the bat, when you pull into a gas station and you pump a gallon of gas, you're paying about 80 cents per gallon just on taxes and fees. 18 cents of that is federal gas tax. The rest of that is California taxes and fees. And then since I wrote that story a couple of days ago, I've had a couple of readers come in and say that there's even more than that as well. You've got the low carbon fuel standard fee, which comes to 3.7 cents a gallon, and then the cap and trade program, which goes to 11 cents a gallon. So when you add all that up, you're almost to $1 right off the bat.
So, I mean, that is part of it, but that's not the whole story here. We've been above $4 a gallon at most stations here lately. A few are cheaper, but it gets people wondering about our mystery gasoline surcharge. Tell us who coined that phrase and what does it mean?
That's from Severin Borenstein, who is a professor at UC Berkeley, and he's been noticing, and other people have been as well. What happened was back in 2015, there was an explosion at the Torrance refinery. It was an ExxonMobil refinery in the LA area. And that refinery got knocked offline. And prices went up.
Supply and demand back then.
Yeah, exactly. Prices went up about 15, 30 cents. But what's interesting is since 2015, after the refinery got back online, after more production came and they were able to get other access to oil and gasoline, that price differential has never really quite gone away. And that's something that Dr. Borenstein was able to notice, was that we were able to see these fluctuations prior to February 2015. Sometimes they went below average, sometimes they went above average on price, but since then the fluctuation has only been in the positive, not in the negative. And so that's the big question, is why has that happened?
And the big question, politicians like Governor Gavin Newsom, as I said at the outset, he says something nefarious might be afoot here, and what's he trying to do about it?
Well, he wants the Attorney General, Javier Becerra, to launch an investigation into that. The California Energy Commission sent a report to Governor Newsom last week, and in the report they talked about this mystery gas surcharge. And one of the things that they pointed to was how, according to the Energy Commission, they figure it's about 30 cents a gallon that's unaccounted for. And they point the finger mostly at branded gasoline stations.
So Shell, Exxon, the big names.
Yeah, 76, those places, as opposed to the small independent stations. So they notice that in the branded stations, they're charging a lot more than at the independent stations. Now, is there something nefarious going on there? Perhaps, but perhaps not.
So it seems like, and reading your story, it seemed like maybe we, the consumers, out of convenience or laziness or whatever, maybe we're part of the problem because we're giving the branded stations our business instead of seeking out independence.
Yes, because even though the Energy Commission was very critical of the gasoline companies, in fairness to them, they also mentioned in this report how there are other studies that show that California gasoline consumers are more brand loyal than they are in other states, which is odd.
It is odd. Everything's so expensive here.
Right.
You'd think you could.
But then I talked to a fuel expert out of Irvine, Dave Hackett, and one of the things that he brought up, and maybe this is sort of explains the non-nefarious explanation for this, is that their studies show that there are twice as many potential consumers, gasoline consumers, as there are gas stations, than there are in other parts of the country.
Again, supply and demand.
Again, a supply and demand thing. And so it could be a whole bunch of these combinations of things. It could be some price manipulation, but it could also just be the way the market is structured here in California.
Robert?
I wonder how much they've studied the psychology of Californians, because they realize that, you know, the average Californian's got a busy life, maybe busier than other places, maybe not, but many people are not going to spend an extra $250 if they're going to save 10 minutes.
Right.
You know. So
yeah, and in the story that I wrote earlier this week, we sent one of our reporters out just to downtown, and even within a small 3-block radius, there was a wide differential in gas prices, and there were people going to the more expensive station. And our reporter Bradley Fikes asked one of the people filling up there. She goes, "Well, it's more convenient for me. Some people have only a Chevron card, for example, and they use that." So we'll see what happens.
Now, getting back to Newsom, angry state legislators, they're trying to see if the big brand companies are squeezing the market and squeezing out independents and all of that. What do the big brands have to say about this? What's their response?
Not a whole lot. No. In fact, the Energy Commission, another part of their study, took a look at the possibility that maybe people are buying the more expensive gasoline because they're thinking that, oh, the more expensive gasoline gives me better miles per gallon. Yeah, it's a better fuel. But from the Energy Commission's analysis, they took a look at and talked to the people at the California Air Resources Board. They couldn't tell, the people at the ARB, they really couldn't tell much difference between the so-called high-quality brand and just the regular brand that you'd be able to find. And getting to your point, they asked the gas companies, well, please give us some data, and the gas companies never respond.
Almost out of time in this segment. Is $4, $4.15 enough to get people out of their cars and onto public transit or bicycles or drive less, or you got to get to $5, $6? Do we know what the tipping point is quickly?
That's a question for Sandag.
Okay.
I'll punt over that.
All right. And we'll come back on the show and we'll talk about that one very soon. Well, anyway, we all hope the prices come down at some point here, or get an electric car, as some of us have. Well, we're going to move on. Next year, we have 2 big elections, the California primary in March and the general election in November. But they are different animals. And this week, a majority of San Diego City Council members supported putting the long-debated hotel tax hike issue before voters in March. And Lori, start with this tax. What's it going to do if it's passed? And we got to have a supermajority, right? 2/3.
Right, and that's a really high bar.
That's the rub.
Yeah. So they may have a very strong coalition behind them. Some say the strongest coalition ever for a tax hike. But they do have that supermajority, which is rarely achieved in San Diego. So basically, it would raise the effective hotel tax to as much as 15.75% for the hotels closest to downtown, and it would raise money for 3 key things: convention center expansion, which they've been trying to get for more than a decade, homeless services and housing, and repair, to a lesser extent, repair of roads. So those 3 things that would raise billions of dollars over a 42-year period.
And break that down a little more for us. First of all, who pays for it is mostly a TOT, a tax on tourists,
as we say. So it's about $3.5 billion for the convention center, about $1.8 billion for the homeless, and then about $500,000 for the road repairs.
And that would be annually raised for those?
No, that's over a course of 42 years.
Oh, 42 years. So not annually, a little different there. Okay. We always have to bring those time elements in. Now, this week's council vote isn't final, but it looks like it's going to happen, and it was close, too. We're going to get to some bites from a couple council members on either side of this issue. But this wasn't supposed to happen. Didn't voters say just recently here, we're going to put all these on the November election? We want to get them away from March, and explain why.
Yeah, about, I think, 66% of voters in 2016, it was called Measure L, and it said citizens' initiatives should be voted on by the most people, and that typically is in a November general election. And that was the will of voters. And so this council minority, was close, said that we should be following the will of the people. Those who support this measure say it's too important to wait any longer, and there was a little out in that measure that said ultimately the council has the latitude, the discretion to change it to another election.
And they took that out.
And they took that.
All right, let's hear
option
from a couple of folks on each side of this issue here. We've got Keith Maddox of the Labor Council on election shopping.
But here we are again with the TOT Increase Convention Center campaign engaged in election shopping. Even though they could have qualified their measure for the November 2018 election, they did not. They waited and ultimately qualified for the November 2020 election. But now they want the city council to put them on an early election that favors them, which is the very definition of election shopping.
God, we heard that. Now I want to hear from a couple of the council members. And as we said, it was quite a debate there. Councilman Mark Kersey voted to move forward. Barbara Bree, candidate for mayor, opposes the March vote. Let's hear those.
If they didn't want the council to have the authority to do this, they frankly shouldn't have given it to us. None of us wrote that measure. It was submitted as a citizens measure.
With the passage of Measure L, the voters told us they want citizens' initiatives on the November ballot. This measure can wait 8 months. Once we, the council, start putting measures on the March ballot, we are playing political games. This issue is so important that it should go on the November ballot when more people vote.
All right, that's the whole thing.
I should point out that first clip, that was not Keith Maddox. That's someone who's arguing against putting on the March ballot. Keith Maddox is with the Labor Council, and he supports moving forward.
Okay, we queued up the wrong one there. Thank you for straightening that out. Okay. So again now, why do we have so many more folks come out? Obviously we have a presidential election. We've had this national debate, talked a lot about on the show about our unusual situation in Washington, but typically it's just a lower turnout, a more kind of a party-oriented turnout in March, right, than November?
Right, but ordinarily, I'm thinking you're going to have a huge turnout in March because so San Diego is going to, or California is going to have a chance to have a say in the primary.
Right,
so I think you're going to have it's still a very decent turnout.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out because that's the big difference this time. This is on Super Tuesday. It's in March. You know, you're only starting a month before the first votes in Iowa and then New Hampshire. So we could really, for the first time in a long time, get a lot of folks out in March here, don't you think?
Yeah. So I think so. And again, as I said, you had a lot of people supporting putting this in March. You have the power of labor, big business, civic leaders. So it's probably not a hard leap to get it into March. And as I said, that Measure L does offer that out for the council to have the latitude to change it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier the coalition behind this, and I want to get to Mayor Faulkner's stand on it and all, but explain who that coalition is and why you say it's so broad this time, and then the mayor, how's his leadership going to impact this?
Right, because normally on a measure like this, you cannot have any bit of opposition, or I should say well-funded, organized opposition, and I don't believe there's going to be any well-funded, organized opposition. So a combination of organized labor, which isn't always on the same side as the Republican mayor, and then.
But it means jobs because of the.
And it means jobs, yeah, of course. So they're saying both permanent jobs and then huge number, thousands of construction jobs, and as I said, you've got the tourism leadership, the hotels, you've got the chamber, and then you've got pretty much a lot of elected leaders in support of this, and those who voted against putting in March are not opposed to the measure. They just were saying it should go in November. So you have a pretty unified front. There is this group that this citizen group that backed the Measure L. They are opposing it, but I don't think they're going to have the financial wherewithal necessarily to make a dent in an opposition campaign.
All right, and the mayor, it's an important issue to Kevin Faulkner, right?
Oh, very. I mean, from the day he took office, and even when he was a councilman before he became mayor, this has been, his thing. It's his. He wants it to be his legacy. And then when Mayor Sanders, when he former police chief, and when he was mayor, it was his initiative too, but he couldn't get that through. So this has been a big deal.
So the big argument, of course, is expand that convention center, which, as you said, is the bulk of the funds are going to go to that. But that's to keep Comic-Con, attract other big convention, compete with Anaheim, Las Vegas, other convention cities.
Right. They want to stay competitive, and they can't get the big conventions that other cities are getting as they expand their centers. But I think a real selling point on this measure is going to be less about the convention center and the homeless funding. The city council just embraced a big homeless funding program, and it's going to need close to $2 billion. Where are they going to get that money? Yeah, there's other sources, but this is going to provide a big chunk of that money that they need to address the homeless problem.
All right, and we got a few seconds left here. Not the kind of issue that gets a lot of polling, especially this far out, but any indication of where the polls are? As we said at the outset, it's a 2/3 vote. It's hard to do. We were mentioning the 03 and 07 fires famously couldn't get increases in taxes to fund firefighting at that time.
Right. So, of course, I'm told that their internal polling shows that they're doing well, and it's also helping them on their messaging. We at the Union Tribune, we jointly did a poll with Channel 10, and one of the questions was about a convention center ballot measure. It didn't mention the homeless. That didn't do so well. I have a feeling the polling will look better with homeless and street repairs in there.
Well, we'll certainly see. We'll be talking more about that and see as that goes. A lot of election coverage coming up. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Robert Creer of the San Diego Union Tribune, Shalina Chatlani of KPBS News, Rob Nikolewski, and Lori Weisberg, also with the Union Tribune. A lot of my Union Tribune friends here today. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today, and join us again next Friday on the Roundtable.